How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video we're going to take a look at what soon will become Tropical Storm Agatha in the Eastern Pacific and determine if this will reform into Tropical Storm Alex in the Gulf of Mexico and potentially become a Gulf Coast threat for the United States. And we'll also talk about the possibility we could see Tropical Storm Bonnie as early as this week of entering this week of June. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. Make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather-related content. So let's begin by taking a look at Invest 91E, which at this point you might as well call it Tropical Storm Agatha, because we're right at we're pretty much right at its doorstep when it comes to its formation into a tropical depression or tropical storm, because you see that there's a lot more thunderstorm activity surrounding the center circulation, a lot more than yesterday, that's for certain. And as a result, we're seeing the pressure drop, which is increasing the winds around the center circulation to a point where we're not going to be very far from really naming this Tropical Storm Agatha, as I'd say it'll only be within a few hours we will see this get upgraded into Tropical Storm Agatha, and will likely become Hurricane Agatha as it continues to move north and potentially a little bit westward before it moves into the southern portion of Mexico. So you see that a lot more thunderstorm activity overall, a lot more convection around center circulation. So as a result, Tropical Storm Agatha is likely to form within the next several hours. Now, taking a look at sea surface temperatures at which the center circulation is over at this point, you see that sea surface temperatures are hovering around 30 degrees Celsius. They did lower just a little bit today as a result of how slow Invest 91L is moving, because of course as tropical storms, or at least a low pressure system, stays over the same area over the water for a prolonged period of time, that creates an upwelling in the ocean, and that brings a lot of that cooler water from the deeper ocean depth, the deeper portion of the ocean, and brings it up to the surface, which does cool down the sea surface temperatures just a little bit. But of course, it isn't at all enough to really slow this tropical storm from developing in the future. So as a result, we should expect a faster rate of development, because sea surface temperatures are much warmer than average for this time of the year just south of Mexico, and we're seeing 30 degrees Celsius sea surface temperatures are equivalent to upper 80 degrees sea surface temperatures, which is just going to promote a rapid amount of convection, a lot more than you'd think, at least compared to if the sea surface temperatures were closer on the lower end of the 80 degree range. So if I were to show you guys the probability of this developing within the next 5 days, we do see that there's a pretty much high 90% chance over the next 48 hours this develops. So I'd say it's pretty much inevitable this will develop into Tropical Storm Agatha. The conditions are there, the wind shear is light, the sea surface temperatures are more than warm enough to support for tropical cyclone development, and there isn't a lot of dry air really hindering this storm from developing. So as a result, Tropical Storm Agatha within the next few hours is likely, and southern Mexico needs to pay very close attention to this. Now, take a look, another thing I want to show you guys is the MJO pattern, and if you don't really know what this is, pretty much an MJO pattern really forecasts whether or not conditions will be more favorable for tropical cyclone development or less favorable for tropical cyclone development. And a positive or negative MJO pattern typically lasts for a 30 to 60 day period over a portion of the world before it switches into another phase. So relatively speaking, this phase changes rapidly when it comes to how favorable tropical cyclone conditions will be for development. And you see that as of today, we are in a slight negative MJO pattern just south of Mexico, which is promoting a little bit more lift than what you typically experience right around the Eastern Pacific. However, if we were to move 1 week from now and 2 weeks from now, you see that the negative MJO pattern strengthens. So as a result, conditions over the next 2 weeks should become more favorable for tropical cyclone development, which is a concern as Agatha moves northward and potentially moves into the Gulf of Mexico, where there's going to be more lift in the atmosphere, so we could see a rebirth of a tropical cyclone right around the Gulf of Mexico into next week. So that's something we're going to need to pay close attention to, because that could definitely enhance the chance of tropical cyclone development. And so now let's take a look at the computer models, and there is a little bit more certainty than yesterday, but unfortunately there's still a relatively high amount of uncertainty when we're talking about a tropical cyclone that's only 1 to 2 days away from potentially making landfall along the southern coast of Mexico, where you see that if we were to take a look at the GFS model, the GFS model has been persistent on a landfall that's well further eastward and will make landfall further eastward along the southern Mexico coast, and it's also been persistent on bringing a much stronger storm along the Mexican coastline, which is definitely more concerning, because we do see the millibar pressure drop down to the 950s, which is equivalent to major hurricane status in a lot of cases. So that's something to keep in mind. And this storm, I'd say it's around medium to maybe small size, so most likely 958 millibar storm would be considered a major hurricane at this point. But of course, all tropical cyclones are different, and we don't necessarily know the exact size of this storm once it makes landfall, but most likely it'll likely be a smaller storm. So as a result, though, that pressure gradient will be more compact surrounding the center circulation, which should enhance the top wind speed of this low pressure system, most likely making this a major hurricane at landfall based on the GFS model's depiction of Tropical Storm Agatha, or what would be Hurricane Agatha at this point. But it's a stark contrast when we take a look at the European model. If we were to take a look at the European model, so if I were to move back towards right now, you see that the European model wants to drift this a lot further westward and a lot weaker as a result, as it seems like the European model just wants to sort of just meander this further westward, and it's a lot weaker. We still don't see a really defined area of low pressure as this heads further westward. I meant to say, I think I said eastward. I meant to say westward. My bad for that. But yeah, the European model still is persisting on moving this westward, and it's a lot weaker of a storm because it only peaks right around 986 millibars, which is equivalent to maybe a strong tropical storm or low-end Category 1 hurricane, and makes landfall around the 990 millibar range and makes landfall a little bit further westward. But what's interesting is that despite the European model wanting to take this further westward and not really taking a track further northward, it still wants to steer it eastward at the very last minute, to a point where the landfall is very close to where the GFS model depiction of this tropical cyclone is, and as a result, that does raise the certainty of where exactly it'll make landfall as a result of this eastward hook that the European model has been taking. But there's still uncertainty regarding the strength and the exact track of it, so you definitely need to stay tuned along the southern coast of Mexico. But just keep in mind that the GFS model is seeing a much stronger storm, the European model a lot weaker, so definitely keep that in mind. But moving forward beyond its landfall in Mexico, we're going to see this storm meander, and we could see it redevelop in the southern Gulf of Mexico as early as Wednesday of next week, right around June 1st, where we do see a formidable low pressure system right along the southern coast, right along the Yucatan Peninsula, just to the west of the Yucatan Peninsula. And if we were to continue to move forward, we do see it strengthen a little bit more before it takes a turn northeastward and potentially into Florida 10 days from now. But of course, 10 days forecast right around 10 days from now is basically a guess by the computer models at this point. But if we were to look at a forecast window where the certainty is higher, let's say between the 5 and the 7 day mark, you see that the European model is wanting to develop this along the southern Gulf of Mexico, which is definitely interesting. And when we do see a tropical cyclone develop in the Gulf of Mexico or form in the Gulf of Mexico, there's only so many areas it could go towards without missing the United States Gulf Coast, because you see that just to the north of this storm, you see we have Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida. So it's going to be very difficult at this point to entirely miss the United States unless this takes a track further westward, which I'd say is unlikely at this point. The upper level winds along the northwestern portion of the Gulf of Mexico will be too strong, so the only areas it could really go is either directly northward or maybe northeastward. And even if it does move northeastward, we have Florida that's right in the path of where the northeastward track would take us. So it's going to be very difficult for this storm to avoid United States landfall at this point, with the stronger than usual wind shear just to the northwest of the Gulf of Mexico. That's going to want to steer it to the northeast. So it is definitely something to be aware of all along the Gulf Coast, pretty much, especially I'd say if you're east of Louisiana. That's where you could potentially be under target for a tropical cyclone. But again, there's still a lot of questions regarding maybe the exact track of this, because the GFS model is disagreeing on where exactly this will go. But what's interesting is that the European model is now taking a track further eastward, sort of like the GFS model. So we could see a track that maybe goes towards Florida, which is very interesting. If I were to show you guys, a GFS model makes landfall in southern Mexico, and we do see it develop well further eastward and closer to Cuba. And in fact, in this scenario, it sort of misses Florida, or at least just brushes it. But the fact that now we're seeing a consensus where it wants to take this northeastward, maybe closer to Florida, definitely should put Florida at high alert, or at least be aware of the possibility of a tropical cyclone. But the track won't really matter if this storm doesn't really develop. So we need to determine if this develops first. And as of right now, both the GFS and the European model want to develop at least some sort of maybe formable low pressure system or a tropical cyclone as it heads into the Gulf of Mexico or the Caribbean Sea. But it's definitely far from certain, especially when the forecast is 5 to 7 days out. So if I were to show you guys a relative humidity map, you see that while there's going to be a decent amount of moisture, we still need to be aware of the amount of dry air towards the northern portion of the Gulf of Mexico, because that could hinder it from developing. While the dry air isn't necessarily close to where the GFS model wants to develop this tropical storm or low pressure system, it's still there's still a high amount of uncertainty of where that dry air will be located, as we could see the dry air head further southeastward, or the storm move more northwestward than expected, which would encounter more of that dry air. So just because it doesn't look like a dry air is necessarily hindering this storm does not mean it's going to continue to stay that way, because it's very well possible that dry air could move further southeastward. And dry air isn't the only thing we're going to need to pay close attention to. Also, the amount of wind shear. While the amount of wind shear will be light where it's currently located at in the Eastern Pacific, you see that there's going to be a continuous stream of strong wind shear throughout, pretty much swallowing the Gulf of Mexico, which is why I'm expecting this storm to move northeastward if it were to develop. And we do see a little bit of an upper level high located in this region, but we just see strong upper level winds, which would hinder this storm. Where the GFS model wants to develop it, the wind shear is just light enough for tropical cyclone development. But it's the same situation with the dry air. We could see the wind shear maybe move further southeastward than expected and hinder this storm from developing, or maybe the storm moves further northwestward than expected and encounters more wind shear. Those are two certain those possibilities are definitely possible as we head into next week. Taking a look at the European model, when it comes to the amount of wind shear, you see that the wind shear, the European model is definitely expecting an area where the wind shear will be much lighter and a lot larger, to a point where it won't really affect the structure of this low pressure system, but still, again, a high amount of uncertainty. We're going to need to wait and see if this maintains its forecast, and if it does, we could very well see Tropical Storm Alex out of this in the Gulf of Mexico and potentially impact Florida. That's suddenly something we're gonna need to pay close attention to, and I'll make sure to update you guys regarding where this wind shear will exactly move over the next several days, because that will be key in determining not only where this storm goes, but if it actually develops or not, and how significant this storm could be if it were to move northeastward, potentially into Florida. So that's something to keep in mind headed into of next week all throughout the Gulf Coast states. Now, another thing we're going to need to pay close attention to is the potential for a tropical cyclone that could develop off the Florida coast, because if I were to continue to move forward, we do see a small low pressure system that could develop just off the Florida coast. I'd say it's still unlikely. I did mention this in my prior video, but it seems like the GFS model is now even less lenient on developing it, as, like I said, the wind shear throughout the Gulf of Mexico is still going to be very strong, and there's going to be quite a bit of dry air throughout the northern Gulf of Mexico. So if this low pressure system wants to develop into a tropical cyclone, it's going to need to be in a very small and specific area to where it won't really deal with strong enough wind shear or strong enough amount of stable air. So if I were to show you guys the wind shear map again, you see that there is going to be that small area where the wind shear will be light, but you see that the wind shear is going to be very strong just to the south of it, and there's going to be a lot of dry air that could hinder this low pressure system. At this point, the chance is still low. I'd say it's even lower than it was yesterday. So it's nothing to, I'd say, worry about just yet for Florida, or even be aware about, but at least keep in mind that maybe a tropical cyclone could develop off the Florida coast, but I'd say it's unlikely at this point. So make sure to pay close attention to that throughout just off the coast of Florida, because that's definitely it's still technically in the realm of possibilities, even though the chance is still low. So that's going to be something to keep in mind. And also I want to point out that sea surface temperatures in this area, not the entire area isn't experiencing sea surface temperatures above 80 degrees, which is again going against that low pressure's favor. So it's going to need some baroclinic influences if this storm wants any chance of developing into a tropical cyclone. Now, taking a look at the computer model forecast, the GFS ensemble members, you see a lot of them want to take this eastward, while some do take it northward into the southern Gulf of Mexico. A lot of them want to take it through Central America and maybe develop more towards the Caribbean Sea, closer to Cuba, and just off the east coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. So but if we were to take a look at the GPS model ensemble members, you see a lot of them want to take it northward. So still a decent amount of uncertainty regarding where this will go, and that could make a bit difference in terms of where exactly this tropical cyclone could go if it were to move northward into the Gulf of Mexico and develop. So that's going to be something to keep in mind. The model intensity guidance, you see a lot of them want to develop this into a hurricane, but a decent amount want to keep this at tropical storm status, which is definitely the hope. So make sure to keep that in mind. And here is my forecast when it comes to what will likely become Tropical Storm Agatha. I expect it to make landfall potentially as a hurricane right along the southern Mexico coast, and it could move northward into the open Gulf of Mexico, and I expect it to move northeastward most likely. At least sometime it should move eastward, so that could put Florida at risk. And Tropical Storm Bonnie, I'd say it's less likely just off the coast of Florida, but it's at least something to be aware of. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content, and I hope you guys have a great day.